Welcome to the Elokus podcast. This is class number 13 in the Maayon Afar Yakov, which is the 8th discourse in the great book, B'Shosh Dimu, 5672. And today we begin chapter 32. This is going to be class number 1 in chapter 32, which is the 32nd, the heart. Lamed Beis is the heart of the entire book. So let's go. However, we learned in the last class that there's 3 stages. First, there is the abstract of the Or Pnimi, the internal light, but it's the Esesphiros Agnuzais, the hidden 10 Sephirot as they are in the source, where over there you don't recognize at all that there is 10. You don't recognize at all the nature of each of the 10. You don't even recognize that they're 10. It's completely submerged and one with the infinite. The next, that's called Nakuda, a point, and then we learned once they emerge outward, they're already noticing 10, but you don't really see the differentiations and the style and the particularization of each of these powers, because the source of this light is still dominating over the light, and therefore overwhelming it with pshitos, even though there is already colorization and there is already subtlety of personality and characterization and definition. But in general, since the light, it's still Or Ein Sof, it's still light, it's still reflecting the source, where the source is pure, is pashut, is simple. Therefore, you don't even sense, and that's why it's called Esesphiros Beli Ma, without a substance. Finally, only afterwards, when it goes into the vessels, and that's called, and that's called a line. When a line is made up of many dots, you can see already many, but you don't know what the many are. And then finally we come to the state of Shetach, which is space, in which each sphere goes into a vessel, and once it goes into the vessels do a job already on the light to characterize the light, that the lights become very much like the vessels, and you can then at that point already be margish and sense and feel the kindness, or literally it's a light of kindness, it's a light of gevura, and it becomes already applicable to create and conditioned, so to speak, to create finite worlds, which is based on this finite structure of the lights of Atzilus. Okay, now we continue further. Very important point. This, that we said that the vessels are able to overpower the light and give colorization, definition, to give already the imprint the lights with the nature of the vessels. In other words, the real Hagbala, the real definitions are in the vessels. But that the vessels are able to take hold of the light and make the energy be tainted by the vessels, we have to realize that's only because the lights themselves inherently have already those light notes. But because the lights are still so reflective of the source, those notes are too subtle, too benign, too delicate for it to show. So you don't see that subtlety. What the vessel does is it draws forth and it highlights and it accentuates, if you might say, it emboldens the hidden definition that's in the light. So it's not that, in other words, if the lights would be like, remember we learned the other Shita like the Ramak? If the lights would be like the Ramak says, not like the Arizal, if the lights would be utterly simple, then the vessels would not really imprint upon anything upon them. And then even though in a water in a blue cup, or water in a green cup, a bowl, to the Ramak, the lights are always remain pashut, and the only definitions of creation are related to the vessels. But according to the Arizal, according to the way we're learning over here, it's not that case. That there is already a hagbala, there is already a definition in the lights. It's just that while they're in the lights, they're too subtle for them to be pronounced, and the vessel was able to that the light itself becomes imprinted with these colors, is because the light itself has already the colors to begin with. And that's what he's going to explain. Become grass, to become something, that it should become the light of Chachma, that the Chachma should feel Chachma, should be wisdom, chulu, and the light of chulu, meaning the lights of the other spheres, the light of Bina should be Bina, and so forth. This is not only attributed to the vessels. This is not attributed to the vessels. That it's only the vessels that is responsible for that. Because the light essentially the light essentially has 10 spheres. It has already the 10 inside of it, meaning each light has a different sphere. Even though we still consider these lights before they go into the vessels without substance. So he says it doesn't mean utterly without substance. Nevertheless, that means it's felt like it doesn't have any substance. Through the vessels, nasim, though those very lights that are without substance, without definition, they become b'bchenas metzius. They become in a state of existence. Perek, like we spoke about this in chapter 13. That's quite a while ago, when we spoke about Hillel and Shammai. Remember, we said that Hillel is a very kind sage, and Shammai was a strict sage. Being in Hillel and Shammai. And whenever they studied something, they learned both from the same teachers. And yet Hillel walked out with that idea, and that generated in him a drive for a kind application of that mitzvah, or that rule. And Shammai picked up on that very same lesson, and it became driven in the world of Shammai towards stringency and towards strictness, which is more of a rigidity, which is more of a discipline type of an energy. So both of them learned from the same teachers, and yet in Shammai's head, it's all strict, it's all gevura. In Hillel's head, it's all chesed. But he says the svaras etzlam, the svara, the idea, the teaching, the concepts, hey, chesed gevura, are really in a level of chesed. In Hillel, the concept he learned in yeshiva that day, where by Shmai and Avtali and by their teachers, is now in his mind a very kind idea, and and calls for leniency and lack of and non-judgmentalness and so on and so forth. That very same idea in the mind of Shammai is really gevuradig, meaning full of a sense of discipline and judging and so on and so forth. Holy judgment. We're not talking about, God forbid, a non-holy judgment, but still, it's all that. It has that intensity to it. In their minds, it's literally chesed and gevura. Now, where did that happen? If you were to record not a Hillel giving a class or Shammai giving a class, but you were to trace their classes to their teacher's lecture, and you would kind of try to see what the teacher Shmai and Avtalion taught, you'll see that Shmai and Avtalion's class doesn't seem to have any leanings to kindness or to severity or to discipline. It's just a pure abstract idea. However, he's going to say now, so therefore you might think that because Hillel has a brain that's wired with kindness, his soul, whatever this we discussed earlier, and Shammai has a brain that's wired, he has, therefore his mind that he is. So therefore he sees everything through that lens. So therefore you might think that it really starts in the whole chesed element of it, which is the kindness of Hillel, and the strict element of Shammai is really only beginning and only starting in their heads. So he says that's not true. As he says, the even though this is taking place in their grasping, or permitting. And Shammai grabs that very same idea and sees that very same reasoning to be strict. Remember, we spoke how God uses the same reasoning before the flood to judge the world and to condemn the world, and to condemn the world to a, God forbid, to a flood. And after the flood, as a justification to cut the world some slack, to be more patient with the world. What's the argument over there? What was the idea? The idea is that man is born from the very birth. The man has a evil inclination. So before the flood, God says, "Well, he's rotten to the core. We have to punish him." And then the very time, God says it's not his fault because he's born that way. The very same reason. So that's what we learned. You see, you could take one very what we call pariv. It's not milichik. It's not fleshik. What that means is it's not dairy. It's not meat. It's pariv. It's middle ground. And then depending on who's receiving it. However, he says but he says no. The truth, however, is the true reason why it is this way is because even the teachings of the ideas that came from the teacher, that includes already notes of kindness and notes of severity. Ba'atzma, behelim, it's there in a very hidden state. Therefore. So depending on what kind of vessel you pour it in, a vessel which is a vessel that is leaning to the realm of kindness is going to pick out and ignore the light little hairs that are pointing towards strictness. It's just going to ignore it. It's just not going to feel it at all. And on the other hand, if you're pouring it into a vessel which is in a mind of Shammai, he's going to pick up on those very subtle notes of strictness, and he's not even going to notice. It's going to slip right by him those potentials for kindness. Therefore, because it's there already in the source, that's why when it lands in their head, it will land in a state of real kindness or in a state of real gevura, in a full-fledged manifestation. Okay, so this is one example to this idea. Now he's going to use another example. So one is from Hillel and Shammai studying from the same teacher. His next example is going to be in general. The fact that the intelligence of the soul, which is very, 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 very lofty and very, very high, it's a complete different type of an intelligence that we even know. And yet when that soul lands in a physical brain, and it operates its intelligence through the gray matter of the brain. For that reason, it becomes a physical intelligence. Now, the reason, so even though the real physicality of it is only because it only begins in the physical brain, that means the soul, the moment it leaves the physical brain, has a complete different experience of intelligence. However, that's because it still is intelligence. In other words, it's not a pure, the soul of the energy of the soul, in as much as the intellectual energy of the soul, is not just abstract energy. It's not like the soul is just a pure energy that can't be defined by anything. And when you run that energy through a brain, it becomes intelligence. And when you run that energy, that very same energy, you run that energy through the heart, it'll become an emotion. And you run that energy through the eye, it becomes vision. That means that you would argue that the lights remain utterly pure. So he says, not that way. Of course, the soul has an intelligence. It just doesn't have a coarse intelligence. When that intelligence of the soul goes into the brain, it coarsens up, but it's still running the same program. That's the point. In other words, it doesn't only begin in the vessel, it starts already in the light. It's just that in the light, it's harder to notice it because it's very subtle. The same is also in the light of the intelligence. That comes down b'moyach in the physical brain, b'hasag and a grasp. Kizu, in this manner, that is not in any way in comparison to hasaga, to the grasping of the haseichel of this very intelligence shebenefesh hamaskelas, that is in the abstract intellectual soul. That means a soul that is not in a body has a complete different experience of understanding, of intelligence. But the reason why it does, even though there's a great vast difference, but the reason why when it goes into the body it does operate through a physical in such a physical and its intelligence is so embedded in matter and in the material world, is only because in the soul it's also intelligence. V'chachma dafka, and chachma. It's not just a pure energy. There is a power in the soul of intelligence. When that intelligence hits the body, it will gravitate to the brain, and in the brain is where the brain will then, the vessel will thicken it and dense it up to be more chunky, might you say, to relate to physicality. The lule kain, if it wasn't so, if it was a plain abstract soul energy, it wouldn't be enclosed at all. It wouldn't become unified, enclosed, becoming completely vested in the matter of the brain. And it would never turn into a physical grasp. So the same is also the compare, as we compare this above. Since there is chachma, which is wisdom, and bina, and understanding, those are the two main intellectual powers, and then the emotions as well. There is chesed, kindness, and gavura, and strictness. Or in the light itself has these notes of these energies. Hagam shezel, even though it's still very hidden, concealed. And in general, it's very simple. The light doesn't feel like it has this flavor. It seems it's very abstract. But since essentially it's there already, that's the reason. That's the reason, because of these subtleties that make the lights. That's what creates within the light a little tiny cracks. It's like, you think about mountain climbers. They have to climb a mountain. If it's straight, sheer, what do you call it? What is it called? Marble, like a marble type of a wall. Or they have another name for it on Yosemite. I forgot the name of it. Like a plain sheer. So you can't, if you can't stick your fingernails in, if there's no tiny bit slats or cracks, you can't climb it. You need to be able to have some kind of a grasp on it. So we're saying the same thing. If the light would be utterly simple, then it would be utterly slippery, meaning there would be nothing to. So there are these hidden dents that are in the light, which allow, therefore, the vessel to grasp it. That's the point. And that's why the light is able to become invested in an enclosed manner, internalized in the vessels. It becomes grasped in the vessel. Once the vessel grasps it, then the vessel digests it and turns it into something that is more like the vessel. And it becomes like the substance of the vessels. It becomes a very defined state of existence, chachma, bina, wisdom and understanding, v'chesed and gavura, and kindness and severity. It's not at all anymore like the simple light on its own. In other words, once it goes into the vessel, it becomes very much like the vessel. Like we said before, that when it goes into Hillel's head, it becomes very kind. And when it goes into Shammai's head, it becomes very, very strict. And now, once the lights become ingested in the vessels and absorbed in the vessels, so now their effects are like the vessels, which is way, way lower than the light on its own. Just like, for example, the power of vision in the soul would not see anything physical unless it's transferred through, or it's transmitted through, the physical eye. The physical eye takes that abstract power of vision and turns it into a physical vision. And this is like the example of the soul. All the way in the beginning of the entire study that we were learning in chapter 3 is where he talks about how the powers of the soul are really powers. It's not like just the plane. There is an energy of the soul itself. That pure light of the soul, that's life itself. And that doesn't get processed in the vessels. That's just the power of life. Sometimes we'll see soon it's the power of will. After the first 12 discourses, we're going to start learning about the Or Makif. That's the light of the soul itself. That's not the powers of the soul. But here we're talking about powers because they're powers. Even though when you look at them, you wouldn't even notice. Again, if you would examine these powers before they go into vessels, you wouldn't even notice that they're powers. They're so subtle. But essentially, they are that way. Therefore, when they go into the body, they become like the body. They become like because the soul has kochos, it has powers, and these powers are from the very get-go in the soul itself. They are meant to be particular powers. Tahainu, what does that mean? They're not just a plain radiance of the soul itself. The soul itself, of course, is not a composite of vision, emotion, intelligence, kindness. The soul is not a composite. The soul is a simple, pure, undefinable being. And its energy that it emits is pure, simple, and undefined. And that's life itself. Doesn't have any definitions. But the soul was blessed by God to also have powers. Now, if you're going to examine and do a search in the soul for the powers, you probably wouldn't find them. Like scanning a computer looking for a file, you wouldn't find them. Because they're so hidden. They're so part of the life force of the soul itself. It's the level of Esesphiris Agnuzes. You can't find them because they're too hidden. But the soul contains powers, and it's those powers that are essentially in the soul that when they will interact and engage with the body, each one will be sucked up by its particular limb and then become limb-like and operate in that manner. The Hainu, as he says over here, these powers are not a ray of the essence of the soul. Kiyama, but rather, it's another idea. So how do they exist in the soul? The soul contains within itself powers. Just like the Ein Sof contains within itself these Esesphiris Hagnuzais, these 10 hidden powers. But obviously, as we said earlier, they're not at all detectable, knowable. You don't even see that there is 10. When you look at the soul itself, it's just one pure, simple being, but yet it has within it the kochos. And it's those kochos that are called the or pnimi. It's those powers that are called the internal light, and they will only become noticeable when they finally reach the body. Before they reach the body, you don't even notice it, as he's going to explain now. As they are still included in the soul, they're not at all in a state of metzios, in a state of existence of powers that die. So much so, they're all mixed together. However, when they get drawn from the soul, through a tzimtzum, just like we said that from the Esesphiris Agnuzos, from the 10 hidden spheroids, there needs to first be a powerful tzimtzum. And even in the Esesphiris Agnuzos, there has to be a tzimtzum, a powerful tzimtzum that is mema'et, it diminishes it, and only then can the kav emerge. Same thing in the soul. There is a tzimtzum, only afterwards, after they come forth through a tzimtzum. Then those lights are now ready to be enclosed and grasped by the limbs of the body. So just like it is in the human experience, the same is also in the light of the kav, and the light of that line. It's rooted in the 10 hidden spheres, but in the Orein Sof. So he says the same idea. The Esesphiris Agnuzos is the Or Pnimi. It's not the real Orein Sof. It's not Orein Sof A. It's Orein Sof B that is included in Orein Sof A. She'ein zeh Orein Sof atzma. It's not the Orein Sof itself. Kiyem rather mashashir ein Sof ba'atzma. It's this that the Ein Sof is estimating within himself, leheir, to illuminate b'pchenas mido gavul, in a limited and in a measured and limited fashion. Remember we learned that when there is the alos haratzon, that there is the arousing of the will to emanate worlds, or to create worlds, or to shine to a recipient, that's when there is already some kind of a dimming of the Orein Sof When otherwise he's a potential for infinity, for endless spheros, now he dims his power to be an energy only, but this dimming is not even noticed. It's happening inside as one of him, but it's still dimmer that now it becomes a power for 10. As he says over here, but in this state, while they're still absorbed in the Orin Soif, they are utterly in a state of pshitus, legamri, completely, and they're completely mixed, all 10 of them together. But when they get drawn forth through the tzimtzum, through the contraction, spheres pratiyos, and they come out as an individual spheres called sphere bifnei atzma, each one on its own. But before they go into vessels, that's when they're in a state of kav. Hagam, even though shegam bezeh, even in this level, they're still without substance. They're already closer. Now we can begin negotiating between the light and the vessel. Before that, you can't even negotiate. There's nothing. There's no one to negotiate with. Here you have lights that you have to negotiate with them. Are they willing to drop into the vessel? They are within some kind of a closer place. To become clothed in the vessels. Shal yadam nasa, which through whence they will go into the vessels, they will become in a state of chachma and bina, v'chesed and gevura, and chesed and gevura, wisdom and understanding, and kindness and severity. What does that mean? That in the end of their drawing down, mizgale b'chenes hagbala. So it's interesting thing. This whole subtle 10 spheres agnuzais, who even told us that they exist? As we said earlier, if you do a scan in the Orient Sof, you would never find them. It's just pure Orient Sof. No one would find it. Orient Sof before the Tzimtzum, how would you see? Moreover, if you do a scan in the 10 spheres after they become separate, you won't even realize that there is Chachma. You just know there's 10, you get like they exist, they don't exist. So for sure in this state, but yet we're saying it's not the Orin Sof, it's the Hasha'ara. There is already something there. It's already, that means there is limitation. There is the desire to limit. So how do we know that they're, how we know they're there? Because in the end we find out. Because in Atzilus, in the end, we have these 10 powers. So we trace it back. We say it must be. Comes out that the final stage of these lights is what reveals their existence to begin with in their source. It's the concept that he's going to explain soon, is that when do you know what something really is? When it in the final implementation. I want to share a thought that I always have. There is a deep... there is Tanya, the book of Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe explains Chasidus and the concept of the Baal Shem Tov regarding Tzimtzum. And the Baal Shem Tov really believed, and this is the way we accept, that Tzimtzum is not Kipshuta at all, which means that God is whatever, I'm not going to get into it. But there is another writing, the Vilna Gaon, the great Gaon of Vilna, was in many ways the biggest opponent to Chasidus, believed that God did remove himself from the world. Tzimtzum Kipshuta. Now, the Vilna Gaon had a student, his name was Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Reb Chaim Volozhiner wrote a book to counter the Tanya called Nefesh HaChaim. Now, Nefesh HaChaim has a lot of Kabbalistic ideas, and he talks about Tzimtzum. A lot of people say that the Nefesh HaChaim's, his explanation on Tzimtzum is exactly the same like the Alter Rebbe, like Tanya. But the Rebbe points out that it's not that way, and he shows how Reb Chaim of Volozhin did, by the way, change his mind and became much closer to the Shita of the Baal Shem Tov, but still not the same like the Alter. But when you try to see the difference, it's very hard. You have to really, really have a very abstract mind and to be able to understand the subtlety. But what's always my proof that that they're not the same? The proof that they're not the same is that you see the final product. I'm not getting into, better or worse, doesn't make a difference. Down the line, the students of the Baal Shem Tov and the students of the Alter Rebbe have a certain style in the way they observe their Judaism, the way they influence the world. It's the Chabad way. And then the Reb Chaim Volozhin, who is the father of the yeshiva world, has a complete different energy in the yeshiva world. It's a different type of, in other words, the whole approach to Judaism is very different, and it's huge differences. But if they both had the same teaching on this very fundamental thing, the answer is no. The difference is so subtle, but you can't notice that subtlety until you get to the final implementation. Then you notice that it must be that the teacher who lived 7 generations ago had a different understanding, and therefore it's like when a freeway splits and there are two lanes that suddenly split, and they're both saying 405 or both saying whatever, the 10 freeway, but one is going north and one is going south. In the beginning, you're traveling on the same direction, whether you're on this lane or on that lane. And then slowly they start parting. And then in the end, which means 1,000 miles later, getting on the 10 north, you're going to end up in Jackson, Florida. And you're going to go east. And then you're going to go north. You're going to end up in Santa Monica, California. West. So even though in the beginning you're kind of going on just two lanes, one next to each other, without even a divider, but it's taking you to a different place. So the point over here is that where do you see the something extremely subtle? You can see it in its final implementation. So he's applying that idea that the limitation that exists within the Esespheris Agnuza is the dimming of that light, that it has subtle limitation, is not seen, definitely not in that state, but even in the next stage, the orange, when these lights come out as points, when this light comes out as the oiros, you wouldn't either notice the limitation. It's only when they settle in the vessels, that's when you see the chesed in it. But it brings out the limitation that was already there in the source, but too subtle and too benign for anybody to notice. As he says over here. And that means the B'Soif Hamshachasan. In the end of their Hamshacha, in the end where they finally land, Mizgala, it reveals the limitation, Shebisharshan and Makairan, that's there in their root and in their source, Mashahen, Pchenas Eses Spherois. This that they are 10 spherois. You wouldn't even know that if you were swimming in the Ein Sof. You wouldn't even know that there is Eses Spherois over there. Since the clawless Inyan Eses Spherois Agnuzais, because the general idea of the 10 hidden spherois, who ha'ashara, is already a dip. The Ein Sof already did a dip. What's the dip? He's estimating leheyer, to illuminate b'pchinas mida ugevul, in a measured way. So it's like the soul that has powers. It's not the pure soul itself. It's that the soul contains within itself powers. So here's also the Ein Sof contains within itself an ability to limit its light. Those are those 10 powers. But at Ezem is Gala, this only appears and shows itself b'soifa hamshacha, at the end of the download, b'slapshas ha'oros b'kelim, when the lights settle in the vessels. Ikenoida, and he says in the parentheses, well, this will conclude, the b'chol davar, by everything, ikar v'amitis in yanai, the primary element, and it's true, inyan, mizgala, is revealed b'soif hamshacha dafka, only at the end. That's why in Judaism we say, the Rebbe is non-stop ha'maisa hu ikar. The main thing is action, bringing everything down into the final. What can prove your devotion to God? Not your intelligence, not your inspiration, not even your words. Your behavior. What's the final action? What are you doing? That's why mitzvahs are so important. Okay, I'm going to leave it over here. Have a wonderful Shabbos. We're almost at the conclusion of chapter 32 and concluding this discourse. Awesome. We'll start afterwards. Maamor number 9. Have a wonderful Shabbos. Should be a happy Tisha B'Av. Everything should flip over. And only big miracles.